I had my identity stolen, though not in the way you think. It happened when I went to a fundraising event to support a good friend of mine, and it only took one question. Now, this was just a few weeks after I had shut down my life coaching practice to stay at home full-time with my baby. And if anybody has spent any time with small children, you know they're not really heaping on the acknowledgement for all the work that you're doing. So you're feeding, burping, bouncing, cleaning, and they're not really like, "That was an excellent diaper change you gave me, Mom. Thanks so much." It's very easy to feel invisible in the home, and I was very excited to get out and speak with adults for a few hours. So there I was, dressed up, shaking hands, and I came to speak with a woman with a sharp haircut and a dark pantsuit. She told me all about her important position at the local bank up the street. And the tables turned. She asked me a question. She asked, "What do you do?" Now, this may seem like a benign question to you, but this was the exchange that stole my identity. Because she asked, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a stay-at-home mom." And her face went from eager to blank. And then she looked at me for a few moments and eventually gave me a dismissive look and literally turned her back and walked away. My jaw dropped, and on the inside, I morphed into that cartoon character with a big red head, steam blowing out of its ears, so full of rage, wanting to shout after her, "Hey, lady! But I graduated from Harvard. I worked at Goldman Sachs. I've lived in Tokyo, Hong Kong, and New York. You should want to talk to me." Now, I know that in theory I don't need other people's approval, and I know that I matter, but none of it counted for anything, because in that moment, I felt invisible. That question stole my identity. That question stripped me of all the pride I felt in making a well-considered, difficult choice to give up a career to raise my children. It took all the things that make me a worthwhile and an interesting human being and condensed me into this little label. That question, "What do you do?" is a default question that many of us in the United States have asked or been asked. And I understand we live in a complex world and we want to make sense of it by putting labels on things. You want to hear, "I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a teacher, I'm a writer," and you think that with these labels we understand the person, that we can relate to them through those labels. But the thing is, we each do more than what we do for work. And sometimes what we do for work is not the thing that is most important to us, to our sense of self. You ask what I do, but I am a human being, not a human doing. Could it be that this default question we ask may be one of the questions that is undermining our potential to be happier in this country? Because I certainly felt less happy. I was invisible in the home, and now with that question, I felt invisible outside the home. Sadly, nowadays it doesn't take being a stay-at-home parent to feel invisible. In this day and age, with eyes on our phones, headphones in our ears, social media dominating our lives, it is easy to feel, ironically, disconnected. I've been at restaurants where everybody around the table is heads down on their device. In this day and age, it is easy to feel isolated, to feel unseen. Do you know what happens to people when they feel unseen, when they feel like they don't matter? They can fall into a depression, or like me, they can feel rage. Rates of depression in the United States have increased significantly over the last decade, in particular for the young people. Moreover, between 1999 and 2016, so over those 17 years, overall rates of suicide increased by 28%. And now, for the young people in our society, which means ages 10 to 34, suicide is the second leading cause of death, only behind unintentional injury. Then, there was a study that showed that 30 to 40% of depressed patients experience anger attacks where their behavior and their actions are inappropriate for the situation at hand. When people feel unseen, they can fall into a depression or they can rage. We need to make an effort to see one another. We need to teach our children to see one another. We all matter. Luckily, it's pretty easy to see other people. You ask them questions, good, meaningful questions, and then you listen for the answer. The questions we ask shape the answers we get. And so by changing the default questions we ask, we change the default conversations we have, and changing these conversations can change our level of connection. So here's an everyday example. I was writing at my desk all day, hadn't talked to anybody, and was very, very eager to have a conversation. So when my children walked in the door from school, I ran over, "How was school?" They looked at me, "Fine," and they threw their backpacks on the floor and walked away. I blew it. I wanted to have a conversation, and I asked a default dead-end question. A lot of our default questions nowadays can cut conversation off. These are questions like, how was school, or how was work? How are you? These questions beg for short answers. So lesson learned, on a different day I asked, "Hey, what was the funniest thing that happened at school today?" And my daughter stopped, and you could see the wheels turning. And she said, "Oh, Mommy, this new kid said the funniest thing in class today, and she told me all about the new kid and what she thought was funny." We had a conversation, and we felt connected. Here's why this is important. Questions lead to conversation. Conversation leads to relationships. Relationships make you feel safe and seen and heard, and research, including the Harvard Grant study, which followed men for nearly 80 years, research has shown that the best predictor of your long-term health and happiness are your close relationships. Close relationships are the cornerstone of your happiness. So, taking it back, how do you build relationships? Well, you start by having conversation. How do you enter a conversation? You ask a question. So you want to have more meaningful, close relationships in your life, to feel happier? Start by asking more meaningful questions. I'm a mom, first and foremost, and I don't want my children to feel isolated, to feel lonely, to feel misunderstood, unseen, depressed, and become a statistic or a news headline. And my baby grew into a sweet, smart girl, and she was going through a hard time once. So we talked about going to family therapy, and she pushed back hard. "Why, honey?" "Mom," she says, "I don't need to go talk to someone else. I need you to understand me." I advocate for meaningful questions, and I had completely missed it. I was floored because she was absolutely right. I had not been making an effort to engage with her, to see her. Luckily, what would have happened, right, if she had not been as articulate as she was, and she had continued down that spiral feeling unseen and misunderstood? And what if eventually I had lost my baby? Luckily, in that moment, I saw her, and oh, she knew it. You could see the weight lift off her shoulders, and over time, her smiles started coming more freely. Being seen transformed my child. We each have the power to make others feel seen by asking questions, good, meaningful questions, and listening to the reply. It's a choice we get to make every day with every interaction. I see the power in conscious conversation. I see the value in cultivating loving, authentic communities. I see myself. I have my identity back because identity is not defined by just one thing, one label, one doingness. I challenge you to change your default questions, to shift your intention, to uncover more about the human being. It doesn't have to be a big change. Consider changing what do you do to what do you love to do? Consider shifting how are you to maybe what's coming up that you're most excited about, or what's something interesting you've learned lately? And then listen for their answer. You may see somebody through fresh eyes, and you never know. That might make a life-changing difference. Thank you.